This video is supported by Brilliant.org. We live in a time of unprecedented change. A time when even our most massive and untouchable institutions and ideas are vulnerable to disruption on a massive scale. Case in point, here in Dallas, just last week, the last video rental store shut down. It was called Premiere Video, and it was the place where like the real film geeks went. They had the obscure, weird art films that you couldn't find anywhere else. Even back when there was a Blockbuster on every corner, this was where you went if you were really into movies. And that boutique quality to it is what kept it viable even after Blockbuster went out of business in 2010. Believe it or not, there are 10 Blockbuster locations that are still in existence, most of them in Alaska. Compare that to the 9,000 Blockbuster locations that were around at their peak, which, believe it or not, was in 2005. Now, companies come and go, that's just the nature of business, but what if it's the entire economic system that's outdated and vulnerable? I've talked in recent videos about the challenges our economy is going to face in the coming years with automation and AI and machine learning and stuff like that, as well as some ideas to counter this problem like the resource-based economy. But there are some people that want to drop out of the monetary system altogether with totally new currencies that are faster, easier to manage, more secure, and less open to manipulation. They're called cryptocurrencies, and if you're not familiar with them, you will be very soon. Corbin D, Dan Sand, Philtron 3000, Pertz, Tamanga Chatterjee, Bill Nichols, Gator 157842, and many more requested a video on Bitcoin. So yeah, the topic of Bitcoin and blockchain technology has been one of the most requested topics over the last year, and I've put it off over and over and over again because it's not a subject I'm all that well versed in, but it's clearly a topic that's very popular and a lot of people are very passionate about, so I wanted to try to get it right. So 2017 draws to a close. I'm wrapping things up with 2 videos on this subject. Today's video on Bitcoin, and next week I'm talking about blockchain. Just for you. Merry Christmas. Now, all that being said, I did my best to get all the facts right, but I know for a fact that many of you out there have been following this topic for many years and are far more knowledgeable about the subject than I am, and I encourage you to talk down in the comments and have a conversation about this. Please share with the class. All right, to understand Bitcoin, you have to cast your minds back a little bit, about 10 years to September 29th, 2008. The stock market suffered its worst loss in history, dropping 777 points in one day and far more in the weeks that followed. Billions of dollars in value disappear practically overnight, and the Great Recession begins. While not the only culprit, most of the fingers pointed at the major banking institutions like Lehman Brothers and Goldman Sachs for putting countless amounts of money out there in the form of subprime mortgages and then selling them as credit default swaps in a labyrinthine scheme that eventually crumbled all around them, taking the rest of the US economy with it. This was perceived as only the latest in a series of booms and busts, usually perpetrated by billionaire elites that get off scot-free with golden parachutes. And it was in the middle of this environment of just frustration and anger that literally a month later in October of 2008, a white paper was published on a cryptography mailing list by a mysterious person going by the name of Satoshi Nakamoto. He proposed a decentralized online currency, not controlled by any banks and managed by an online distributed ledger called the blockchain. Some of these ideas had been around a while. There was a group called the cypherpunks back in the 1990s that were creating a lot of ideas that he pulled from to put all this together. And if you want to learn more about the sort of proto-currencies that were the inspiration for Bitcoin, you should check out a documentary on Netflix called Banking on Bitcoin. I'll put the link down below. Anyway, the mood was ripe for this kind of thing, and it attracted a slew of online developers who got together and made this a reality, creating the first Bitcoin in January of 2009. But created based on what? That's the question most people have when they talk about Bitcoin, because a currency has to be supported by something, right? Well, not really. For context, let's go back way back in time and see how currencies first developed and how they've evolved to get to where we are today. And this is a very high-level overview. If you want a much more deep dive into this, the channel Extra Credits has a 6-part series that I'm linking to right here. It's definitely worth checking out. In the earliest days, people traded for goods and services. If you were a fisherman and somebody else made bread, then you could trade your fish for their bread, and all were happy. The problem is this relied on what economists call a coincidence of wants. In other words, you need bread and the bread guy happens to need fish, so it works out. But what if you need bread, but the bread guy is all good on fish? Well, then you've got to find some third item of value that the bread guy does need. So say he needs a tool, then you've got to go find a tool maker, exchange a fish for a tool, and then exchange that tool for some bread. You can see how this gets complicated real fast. What you need is a standardized third item of value, something that you both agree on, that's available and easy to exchange. That's currency. Now, anything can be currency. We usually think of things like coins made out of gold or some other precious metal. This is handy because it has an agreed upon value, but really, it can be anything that has a limited supply. For example, salt was used as currency back in Roman times and in East Africa. In fact, that's where the word salary comes from, the Latin salarium, which means salt money. Both China and India use cowrie shells as currency for thousands of years. In fact, it may be the longest running currency in history. The people on the island of Yap in Micronesia actually used giant circular stones called rhinestones that were too heavy to transport, but they had a set value and everybody knew which one belonged to who. Then there's the obvious examples of cigarettes and contraband used in prison. Now, gold coins and shells and cigarettes are fine for little microtransactions between people, but if you're a giant company or a government and you've got to transport thousands or millions of these things around, it starts to become a problem. Not only are they heavy and difficult to transport, there's also the fact that people tend to, rob you and stuff. It's not secure is the point. So the goldsmiths that created the coins in the first place began to offer to store the currency in their vault so that they were safe and secure, and then offered promissory notes to people that they could then take back and redeem for their coins later on. These goldsmiths became the first banks, and their promissory notes became the first paper money. Actually, the first paper money was developed in China around the 1100s, but that was more of a government-backed thing. These private bank notes started to pop up in Europe around the 1400s. Flash forward about 100 years, and banks began to realize they didn't have to keep all the currency on hand at all times. They could loan out pieces of it while just keeping a fraction of it in their reserves. This became known as fractional reserve banking. And from an economic perspective, this is huge. It put all that money out into the economy instead of being locked up in the bank and spurred a lot of economic prosperity. And that was fine as long as people didn't panic and make a run on the bank. Luckily, panic isn't something people are known for or anything. Now, with all the different banks offering up all kinds of different banknotes, it gets pretty confusing pretty fast, and which leads to the creation of central banks that control the monetary policy in governments around the world. Which gets us pretty much to where you need to know for us to understand Bitcoin, but one last little historical fact. After World War II, the economies of Europe were so devastated that they had to tie their currencies to the American dollar because the American dollar was still on the gold standard, meaning it was backed by gold reserves. The problem is that the economy can't expand without creating new gold. And in the late 60s, the other countries began redeeming their currency for US gold. And with the war in Vietnam and other pressures mounting, eventually Richard Nixon had no choice but to take the United States off the gold standard, which means that our currency, and all currency around the world for that matter, is backed by, well, nothing really. And this is called fiat currency. That's what we have today. Again, check out the playlist from extra credits. It's linked down in the description below. It's actually really fascinating. All of that is to say that currency at its most fundamental is just a way of keeping track of values. And that's basically what Bitcoin is. It's a ledger that keeps track of values. And the difference behind Bitcoin is it's a distributed ledger, which means it's available to everybody and there's no central entity controlling it. It might help to think of Bitcoin as kind of like the Napster of money. See, the big thing about Napster was instead of having to pay a central entity like a record company, you could just share things on a peer-to-peer network that was logged in the Napster software that was available for everyone to see. And it's the same thing with Bitcoin. The songs are the units of currency, and the Napster software that keeps track of all the songs is the distributed ledger that keeps track of all the values. And this way people can exchange currencies peer-to-peer without having to go through a bank that controls all the money and takes a little piece off the top in the form of fees. Now, obviously, units of currency and MP3s are totally different things and require different levels of security and sophistication, especially when you're dealing with millions and even billions of dollars worth of the stuff. So the trick is to create an accurate online ledger that's available to everyone, impossible to be hacked, and anonymous. And here's how they do that. First, the accuracy part. How do you keep an accurate ledger when there's no centralized entity maintaining that ledger? Well, you share it amongst the people. You crowdsource it. Anybody who wants to can use their computers that run programs to keep and maintain the ledger. And since it's spread out amongst everybody, instead of being able to hack, say, the server at a bank, you would have to hack millions of computers in order to mess with it. That's the security part. And as for the anonymity part, each person's identity is protected by high-level encryption, hence the term cryptocurrency. Now, instead of going down that rabbit hole here, if you want to know how the whole encryption thing works, I'll put a video up here that explains it. The ledger's updated every 10 minutes, so every 10 minutes a block is created that contains all the transactions in that 10 minutes and it's added to the ledger. Each of these blocks contains a code at the beginning and the end that connects it to the previous block like links in a chain, hence the term blockchain. Now, this is a very simple explanation of blockchain. I'll get more in depth on that one next week. Now, through this blockchain, you can go through and find every single transaction that's ever been made on a Bitcoin in sequential order. And that's synced with the ledgers on computers all around the world, so if there's anything wrong in your ledger, it's instantly repaired. But with all these encryptions and transactions to process, what incentive is there for people to use their computers to do this? Here's the clever bit. Every time a block is created, a set number of Bitcoins goes to the person who created that block. This is called a block reward. And these Bitcoins are brand new Bitcoins. In fact, this is the only way Bitcoins get made. And since it's kind of like digging gold out of the ground, the people who do this are called miners. So if you ever hear the term Bitcoin miners, that's what they're talking about. People all around the world using specialized computers, solving these problems and putting this together in a race every 10 minutes to get a piece of the Bitcoin block reward that goes out to the people that solve it. And the number of Bitcoins goes down by half every 210,000 blocks, which comes out to about 4 years. The first 210,000 block rewards were 50 Bitcoins, that became 25 in 2012, and then 12.5 in 2016, which is where we are right now. It'll go down to 6.25 in 2021, and eventually the system is designed to stop creating new Bitcoins in 2024, after 21 million Bitcoins have been created. This is necessary because you can't just keep making Bitcoins forever. The only way it maintains its value is by creating scarcity. As for what will be the incentive for miners once they stop creating Bitcoin, I think by that point there's supposed to be a fee system in place that'll take care of that, but I could be wrong about that. Now all of that explains how currencies work and how Bitcoin works as a currency, but what's taken up all the headlines right now is the fact that Bitcoin has exploded in value over the last few months. At the time of this recording, Bitcoin has reached $16,000 per Bitcoin, which is 3 times what it was just a couple of months ago. This means a few things. One is that a ton of money is being invested into mining operations because these block rewards are now worth thousands upon thousands of dollars. And the problem with that is that huge companies are now building mining factories that are crowding out the traditional Bitcoin enthusiasts and entrepreneurs, which leads to a bit of centralization of power, which is what Bitcoin was made to prevent. The other problem is that as the value increases, it brings more and more people into the fold, and more transactions means more processing power to register those transactions. And in some places, the amount of electricity that's required to do this computing actually offsets the amount of money they're making from the Bitcoin. And that energy consumption is staggering. Right now, the Bitcoin network uses 31 terawatt hours of power a year. That's more than 150 different countries around the world. And in fact, Venezuela had power shortages recently because of rogue mining operations in that country. And at its current rate of growth by July of 2019, the Bitcoin network is going to use more electricity than the entire United States. This is going to quickly become a problem. And as the value increases, more traditional banking institutions are going to start getting on board with this. In fact, Goldman Sachs, who many blame for the crash of 2008, just announced that they're going to start selling Bitcoin futures. This is obviously not what the original Bitcoin enthusiasts had in mind. There's also the problem of utility. Up until this point, Bitcoin has mostly been used to buy things online, especially anonymously and most notoriously on the famed Silk Road. But using it in the real world has been a challenge. Now there are some companies springing up like 10x that give you the ability to tie your Bitcoin wallet to a credit card so you can pay for things with Bitcoins in the real world, but these are still in the early stages. So for the most part right now, Bitcoin is being used as an investment in a currency that's rising, evolving, adapting, and growing every day. I seriously can't overstress how much everything I'm saying could be completely obsolete by the time you see this. So this video is already running pretty long and there's a lot more to talk about, like things like Bitcoin mining, how to get into Bitcoin mining, new ways of doing it like cloud mining and pool mining. Haven't really gotten into how you get started with Bitcoin, the various exchanges out there, crypto wallets and that kind of thing. And then there's all the other cryptocurrencies out there like Ethereum, Litecoin, Ripple, and Dash, and all the differences and advantages between those. I also haven't talked on the endless third-party applications, blockchain layers, side chains, and next level functionality that are springing up around this. And then there's the mystery around who the hell is Satoshi Nakamoto. Nobody knows. And it's an important one to solve because he actually owns 5% of Bitcoins. That's over 1 million Bitcoins. And at today's current market value, that's $16 billion worth of Bitcoins. And by the way, there have been rumors out there that he's actually Elon Musk, because of course there are. If I tried to cover all that, this video would stretch until February. So what I'm gonna do is just put a whole bunch of links down in the description below. You guys can talk about this in the comments, and what I really want this to be is just a conversation starter. If you're big on Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, please share your knowledge in the comments down below, and if you're a noob to all this, then well, listen around and see what you can pick up. But I'm gonna wrap this up with a couple of thoughts. Now, I've been aware of Bitcoin for a few years now, but I didn't really follow it. I wouldn't say that my understanding extended any further than just awareness. You know, I knew it was a thing. Go me. But as I read up on this, I really found my head swimming. I was just absolutely floored by how far this thing had progressed, how many people had worked on innovations, and then people who had innovated on top of those innovations, and so on and so on. I started to feel like somebody from the Middle Ages that had been transported to today's world, and the first thing that I was shown was like a steam locomotive. And I'm just marveled by this piece of machinery, and about the time that I'm finally getting my head around this crazy machine, somebody explains to me what cars are, and planes, and space probes that have traveled outside of our solar system, and I don't even know what that is. And I'm not the most uninformed person in the world. I actually run a YouTube channel talking about futurism and technology and stuff like that. You know, I'm not necessarily an early adopter, but I'm far from living in a cave. And it just really struck me how fast technology is evolving right now. So much so that even people who generally keep up with this kind of stuff can get totally left behind. But ultimately, for Bitcoin to become a widely used and mass adopted currency, it's going to have to get to a point where it's as easy to use and intuitive to spend as just opening an account in a bank. And I think they'll get there. You know, technologies like this, especially ones that create entirely new markets like this one does, they tend to have a long incubation period where it's just the Wild West for a while. And there's a bunch of different competing ideas and platforms and ideologies that have to get worked out and problem solved until there's only a few left, and that's when the mass market tends to jump on board. I think cryptocurrencies are where cell phones were back in like the early 90s, you know, still trying to find their feet, still struggling for acceptance, and able to transform the world in ways that most of us can't even possibly imagine right now. Now, I've been asked a million different times from different people if there's a way to donate to my channel through Bitcoin, and I never had anything like that set up, but in the process of researching this and looking into it, I found something. I have a link down in the description below. If you want to throw some my way, have at it. So really, when it comes down to it, Bitcoin, and all currencies for that matter, are just examples of creative problem solving. Problem solving is what we do best as a species, but if you really want to take your problem solving skills to the next level, you really ought to check out Brilliant.org. What's cool about Brilliant is that it's not just a passive learning site, it's an active learning site. They don't just give you facts to memorize, they walk you through the process of figuring it out yourself, which is the most powerful way to learn something, because you get to deconstruct it in your own mind and piece it back together in a way that makes the most sense to you. But it's not just about learning, it's about developing skills that you can carry with you throughout your life. It teaches you how to think like a scientist. And because as a viewer of this channel, you're clearly into learning things, Brilliant has put together an offer just for you. If you go to brilliant.org/answerswithjoe, you can get the first month for free, and the first 200 people that sign up get 20% off the annual subscription rate for life. Not too shabby. Math has always been a weak spot for me, so I've been using Brilliant to bone up on my algebra and geometry, but they also have classes in computer science, gravitational physics, and one of my favorite, the physics of the everyday, which basically gives you just a new perspective on the things that are around you in everyday life. So why not give it a try? Go to brilliant.org/answerswithjoe, links down in the description. Big thanks to Brilliant.org for supporting this video, and a big special thanks to the Answer Files on Patreon who help support this channel and keep the lights on around here. I want to give a special shout out to the newest people who joined the tribe. We got Tobias Beltz, Felipe Longo, Florian Marcher, Jim Hurt, Fuki Barlog, Tobias Gebauer, lots of Tobiases here, Kelly Hawk, George Hoffman Jr., Alex Schafferhans, Boris, Simon Vertanen, and Roberto Laura. Actually, I think I did a pretty good job on that one. All right, if you would like to join them and get access to some secret perks that are available only for Patreon supporters, you can go to patreon.com/answerswithjoe. Like and share this video if you liked it, and if this is your first time here, I invite you to check out some of my other videos, probably on the side over here if you're on YouTube. Talk about topics like this all the time, and maybe subscribe, and you'll be able to see my videos when they come out every Monday. All right, thanks so much, you guys, for watching. Come back next week where I will cover blockchain in more detail. In the meantime, you have an eye-opening week, and I will see you next Monday. Love you guys. Take care.